My name is Alejandra Senkiang. I am the director of the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm so excited to see everyone here today. This all started as an idea on an original meeting that I had with Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights with Yvonne and Oxfam with Minor and Alexandre. And we thought, what a great opportunity in this climate that we're living in to bring people from all across the state whose policies and whose work every day on behalf of immigrants is what makes our state stronger, and make a proclamation and have a proclamation signed by CEOs of cities and towns who are working every day on behalf of all of their residents, regardless of what's happening at the federal level. So it's amazing to see this come into fruition. I'm so excited to have everyone here today from different parts and different sectors. So I first wanted to give a big thank you and introduce the Edward M. Kennedy Institute and bring up Christopher Mosher, who's the Chief Development Officer, who's going to give a welcome on behalf of the Institute. We couldn't think of a better place to really have this civic engagement and have this conversation. And Chris and I had an opportunity to speak a little bit, and I was saying that I was looking for I have a picture of me with late Senator Kennedy that I took in high school, and when people would see it, they'd be like, I'm going to date myself, but they were like, oh, you look like you're standing with like Joey McIntyre or something, and I'm like, no, this is the senator. This is so much better. And so he's been such an inspiration in my own life, personally and professionally. And so for me, and I know for the people that I work with, this is a special honor to be able to hold it here. So I'm going to ask Chris to come and give a welcome on behalf of the Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandra, and keep looking for that picture. Good morning. On behalf of our Board of Directors and Mrs. Victoria Kennedy, the co-founder and president of the board, and Dr. Jean McCormick, the president, it's an honor to welcome you here to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the U.S. Senate. My name is Chris Mosher, and I do serve as the Chief Development Officer here, and it's an honor for me to do that at this institution at this important time. And welcome to the Senate chamber. Isn't this a fantastic facility? How many are here for the first time? Wow. Do you know that this is the only full-scale reproduction of the chamber? And it's awesome to be in a room like this, isn't it? Our mission here at the Institute has 4 hallmarks. We are dedicated to educating the public about the important role of the Senate in our government, encouraging participatory democracy, invigorating civil discourse, and inspiring the next generation of citizens and leaders to engage in their communities. So with this in mind, it's a perfect venue for today's meeting of municipal leaders for immigrant advancement. So we are very honored to have you here today representing your communities and coming together to discuss important immigrant communities across the state. When Senator Kennedy envisioned this institute, he wanted it to be of the Senate, but not solely about the Senate. He envisioned it a place where students and visitors could come and learn about the important role of the Senate in our democracy, but also inspire them to become active citizens within their communities. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Institute. I promise to be brief. Visitors can come here and negotiate and vote in this chamber, and they do so with a tablet similar to an iPad that helps them navigate our interactive exhibits and learn about the history of the Senate and the legacy of Senator Kennedy, who served the Senate for 47 years, and also engage them to become more active within their own communities. In the 2 school years that we've been open, we've hosted nearly 34,000 students from more than 300 schools across the Commonwealth. They come here and they are very engaged in our programs. They play the role of a senator for the day. They take on the role of legislators, and they learn how to empathize, how to compromise, how to find common ground, things that are becoming rare commodities in today's environment, and how to work with people who think differently than they do. We offer our educational programs to Massachusetts school groups free of cost, and I hope we can have representatives from your communities come to the Institute in the years ahead. I want to recognize the organizations that are bringing together today's discussion. The Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement has been an incredible convener of this issue. We are grateful to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice, and Oxfam America. Thank you for all your leadership as well. And thank you for taking the time to come Columbia Point. We look forward to today's conversations. And please, for those of you who have not been here, come back again when you have about 2 or 3 hours to experience the full array of what the Institute offers. I promise you, you will be inspired, you'll be informed, you'll be motivated. And as the Chief Development Officer here, I would be remiss if I didn't invite you all to consider becoming members of the Institute. For a modest contribution of $47, which is reflective of the 47 years that the Senator served in the Senate, you will not only support our mission and the programs, but you'll have the satisfaction of doing good work, and guess what? You also have free admission for an entire year. So if you come back 3 times, you've amortized your gift down to 0. Isn't that a bargain? So it's an honor to have you here again. Thank you and welcome, and look forward to a very spirited and important discussion today.
Thank you so much. I would like to again extend my welcome to the municipal leaders joining us today, mayors, city and town managers and administrators, councilors, and selectmen. I'd also like to welcome our partners in this work, councilors, federal and state government partners, and advocates and allies. I'm going to give a brief overview of the day. We're going to have Mayor Walsh come and give a few remarks, and then we're going to ask our other mayors, selectmen, and managers to come and sign a proclamation. Everyone should have received a copy of the proclamation. We're not going to read through the whole thing, but really a commitment to all our immigrant communities across the state. And then we were going to have a panel of experts who will be led by Boston Globe's Marcela Garcia. And then we're going to have concurrent breakout sessions. And I will come up before that and say where those are going to be. And then we'll have box lunch and then gather for a brief report back. So we're really looking forward to a day of exchanging ideas and making connections and moving forward on immigrant advancement across the state. Well, operation of the immigration legal system is part of the federal government's role. Cities and towns can play a large role in the advancement of immigrants, the people who come to live as our neighbors and community members. We can make them feel welcomed by minimizing whatever barriers so that they can fully integrate into our communities. And together, we can collectively raise our voices to speak to our own experiences of how important immigrant communities are and how integral they are to our cities and towns. I'd like to give a special thank you to Mayor Walsh, who I'm going to ask to step up here in a minute, for your leadership and your commitment to immigrant advancement. You've been a vocal leader for the city of Boston. You've humanized issues that immigrants face and advocated on the state and federal laws and policies that support immigrant inclusion and integration. You have also signed, similar to the mayors and town managers that we have here, taken many actions to support immigrants, from signing into law the Boston Trust Act in 2014, the Communications Access Ordinance in 2016, launching the Immigrant Integration and Empowered Initiative in 2014, and establishing immigrant information corners in all of our city libraries and 4 of our community centers, as well as hosting Citizenship Day. Uh, I also, and so much more. So now I also want to give a special thank you to my colleagues who have helped put this together. Chris mentioned, but again, in the Oxfam, the Edward Kennedy Institute, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and MAPC, along with my City of Boston colleagues who were integral in making this happen. Katie King, who is our Director of Intergovernment Relations, along with our press office, has been hugely helpful. And I want to give a special thank you to Selena Barrios-Milner, who is our Immigrant Integration Empowerment Fellow, who really helped bring this all together on the part of our office, as well as Chief Felix G. Arroyo, who in the Immigrant Investment Office is under the Cabinet of Health and Human Services, and without his leadership, a lot of this work couldn't be made possible. So, but I want to give, again, a special thank you to Mayor Walsh for all the work that you've done in your leadership on this issue, and invite you to come say a few remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Alejandra. And I appreciate all the nice words Alejandra said, but I have to say this. Our Office of Immigrant Advancement has done some incredible things in our city. Prior to the last year, our office was about advancing immigrants' rights. And now this year, it seems like we're letting immigrants know their rights. And Alejandra and her team are dedicated and committed. She rattled off a bunch of things we've done, but really it starts there. So I want to thank you, Alejandra, and thank your entire team, Immigrant Advancement, for their great work. It's a model that offices can be used around the country. So thank you for that. I'd like to welcome all of you for being here. This is an incredible building, as you know, sitting not in the actual seats of the United States Senate, but if you haven't been here before, you should come back here, do a tour, get a chance to be interactive in this chamber. With some of the great votes. Anytime I come in here, I try to see what the other side does. So I come in as a Republican from Wisconsin, and I vote as a Democrat from Massachusetts. So it doesn't work that way. But I want to. So I would suggest you do that. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but there's a couple special people in this chamber that I have to give a shout out to. A couple of the mayors who are on the front lines that are here. So I want to thank them. I see Felix Arroyo first of all. Thank you, Felix, for being here. Felix has done this work for social justice and immigrant rights since before he was elected as a city councilor, and continues it as the Chief of Health and Human Services. We have Mayor Danny Rivera from Lawrence, Mayor Gary Christensen from Malden, Mayor Denise Simmons from Cambridge, City Councilor Shana Bonds from Brockton, and also a dual role, works on Congressman Lynch's office. So Shana, thank you. Selectwoman Katie Green from Acton, Selectman Adam Dash from Belmont, and I know there's a ton of other city managers, law enforcement here. Thank you all for being here today. I truly appreciate it, because I know, as we said earlier, no one is shying away from what's happening today in this state, in this country. So thank you very much for all of that. And there's some other mayors that couldn't be with us today, but they are supportive. City Manager Tom Ambrosino from Chelsea, Mayor Bob Dolan from Melrose, Mayor John Mitchell from New Bedford. So just want to let them know that there's a good group of folks here. This building and this institute is certainly a fitting place for all of us to meet. 59 years ago, Senator John F. Kennedy wrote a book called The Nation of Immigrants. People didn't talk about America like that back then. They did certainly afterwards. Just 11 years ago, Senator Ted Kennedy introduced a bill for immigration reform. Senator Kennedy went to rallies around this country to talk about his legislation. He said, "We stand together as brothers and sisters to shape America's destiny. Old Americans, new Americans, future Americans, all joined together in common good." The Senate passed the bill with a bipartisan majority. That was 11 years ago. You had Republicans and Democrats support that legislation, but the House didn't follow suit. We would be in a very different place in this country today if that bill had become law. Families would be more secure, communities would be stronger, and our nation would be less divided. We would have more capacity to solve other pressing problems that face us as a country. Still, we wait for comprehensive reform. And still today, we stand in our communities and with our communities, all joined together for common good. In our workplaces, in our schools, in every city and town, every single day. Immigrants are a part of our family and a part of our community. Without their hard work, without their values, and their hope for the future, we could not move forward in strength. That's always been true here in the city of Boston. Back in the 1800s, our city became a majority immigrant and first-generation city. Voices would sound familiar to us today, said the sky is falling. But those immigrants built the city that we love and we know. In the 1980s, Boston started reversing decades of population loss. We went down to as low as 563,000 people in 1980 to 680,000 today. That growth is due almost entirely to immigrants. Immigrants built us back up again. And we're not only this city. Our country of origins may be different, but our foundations makeup as a people has not changed. We've always been a nation of immigrants and a Commonwealth of immigrants here in Massachusetts, and we will always remain so. Today, we are joined together as leaders of cities and towns all across Massachusetts to reaffirm our commitment to being welcoming communities, to lift up the great work of each other and each of us is doing to support the immigrant residents, and to make the space for collaboration and sharing of best practices as we move forward. We don't all exactly have the same policy. We don't all have the same policies, that we don't give it the same name. We recognize who we are as Americans. In Boston, 28.4% of the residents living in our city are immigrants. Those immigrants are my mother, Mary, who came to this country in 1959. Those immigrants are Marie St. Fleur, who came from Haiti to this country to run for the legislature in Massachusetts and be the first Haitian-born person ever to serve in the legislature in the United States of America, who opened up pathways for other people like Linda Docina-Fori. Those immigrants are Muhammad Ali, the CEO of Carbonite Computer Systems. Those immigrants are 18 of our 38 valedictorians in the Boston Public Schools this year. Those immigrants are graduate students, small business owners, doctors, nurses, engineers, home health aides, construction workers. Those immigrants are woven into the fabric of every community. And that same story can be said throughout our country. I just got back from Florida yesterday from the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Miami, 2 days ago actually. Immigration reform is on the mind of every municipal leader across the country, both Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter their party or their ideology. Federal policy and White House rhetoric is not working for cities and towns right now all across America. I put forward a resolution calling on the federal government to extend temporary protective status to Haitians living in the United States of America for an additional 18 months. It passed nearly unanimously. But while we were there, the Supreme Court ruled on the White House travel ban. The ruling protects many of our residents who have family, work, and community here. But the ban fundamentally is unnecessary and unfair. And as we speak, the House is considering a bill that would make our laws less humane and cut funds to cities just for defending their constitutional rights to keep their policies focused on their communities. So we have a challenging situation, but our local leaders we have a duty to act on behalf of the people that we serve. And when we come here together, we have the ability to forge regional and national solutions. That work will help us continue to move us forward. We start with a simple proclamation. It says we are a nation of immigrants. Immigrants who enrich our culture, grow our economy, and strengthen our communities. It says we strive to be a welcoming community for all. It says we want immigration reform and we want the current laws enforced in humane and a constitutional manner. It says that municipal leaders, we will work together to protect all of our residents so every child feels safe in their classroom, every family feels safe in their home, and every resident will be respected in their community. I'm going to ask all the city and town managers to please come on up now so we can sign the proclamation. And I want all of you just to understand that the work that we're doing today is important. We have two options. One is we can run and hide, and two, we can stand up. And I know the option for me, I know the option for Danny Rivera, I know the option for Denise Simmons, I know the option for Gary Christensen, and so many other people across this Commonwealth is to stand up and fight. Thank you for being here today, and I hope you enjoyed today.
I know we took the mic, but as you come up, if you could just say your name and title and who you're representing and how are you? Yeah, sign, but say your name.
By the way, 28% immigrants, 48% first generation like myself. Oh.
Mayor Dan Rivera of the City of Lawrence.
Mayor E. Denise Simmons, Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Katie Green, Town of Acton Board of Selectmen.
Gary Christensen, Mayor Malden, and of the most diverse high school in the state.
Joe Curtatone, Mayor of the sanctuary city of Somerville, Massachusetts. Leading the charge as a community to make this a sanctuary state.
Adam Dash, Selectman, Town of Belmont, which became a welcoming town about a month ago.
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager, Town of Arlington.
As Mayor Walsh said, my name is Shana Barnes. I am a city councilor at large for the city of Brockton and in a dual role, the immigration specialist for Congressman Stephen Lynch.
Hey, good morning. I'm Mel Kleckner, the town administrator in the town of Brookline, Massachusetts.
I'm going to ask Marcela Garcia and all of our distinguished panelists to please come and take a seat, and we're going to start the panel. I'll go get him. Mayor Curtatone.
Good morning, everyone. We're just waiting for Mayor Curtatone to join us. Thanks for being here. My name is Marcela Garcia. I'm an editorial writer with the Boston Globe, and I'm really excited to be here with these rock star panelists. So we're just waiting. Should we start or? Okay. Yeah, we can begin. So I wanted to start briefly, if you can each say who you are and what organization you represent and what kind of work you do, very briefly, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ivan Espinosa. Okay, there's just a lag. My name is Ivan Espinosa. I'm the Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Economic Justice.
My name is Iracema Garza, and I am a policy advisor to Oxfam America here in Boston.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Kais, the police chief in Chelsea, and also the president of the Major City Police Chiefs Association.
Thank you so much. I guess we can just begin while the mayor joins us. But Iracema, I wanted to begin with you. I wanted to ask you if you could set the stage for us in terms of the national context. You know, give us a national context, what's happening at the federal level that is forcing us to act at the local level, pretty much. If you can give us an overview of that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, you know, one of the reasons that we're here and that we've got cities all over the country doing exactly what the mayors here are doing and declaring sanctuary cities or welcoming cities, right, is because of federal policy. As everybody knows, probably in January, the president issued an executive order. And in that executive order, what it attempted to do was to sanction cities, sanctuary cities and jurisdictions that would not cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. So just to keep in mind, immigration law and immigration enforcement is the responsibility of the federal government, not the states and not the cities. So I just want to make that very clear because I think that's an important thing. After the executive order, our Congress and the administration, the Department of Justice and Homeland Security have been attempting to enact policies and propose bills. They've proposed bills that in essence support the president's executive order. And there's been a number of them, but most of them try to codify, make it law, the executive order, because that particular executive order, my colleague here is going to talk about it, one of the courts has put a stop to it, at least temporarily. So the legislature, now our Congress, is trying to do something about it. But I want to talk particularly about the bill that may come up for a vote today. Representative that the mayor, actually, Mayor Walsh, talked about. Representative Goodlotty, he is from Virginia, has introduced two bills. And both of these bills, but particularly one called No Sanctuaries for Criminals Act, could really change the way that immigration is enforced in this country. So the very first thing that it does, it prohibits cities like Boston from enacting policies to protect their communities. Some of the things that have been being done here. How does it do that? By expanding the definition of what is currently prohibited. There's a particular law that they hook all of this on that basically says that states and cities cannot prohibit their staff from communicating with the Department of Homeland Security with respect to a person's immigration status or citizenship. That's it. But that particular provision of the law, this bill, would expand it to say you cannot enact anything that in any way would interfere with the ability of the federal government, the Department of Homeland Security, in enforcing immigration. That is very, very significant. In my opinion, there's a lot of constitutional issues. I happen to be a lawyer by training, so I understand, how these things work, and it's a very big problem, and let me tell you why. One of the things then that this bill would do is force cities to honor detainers. Does everybody know what a detainer is? So a detainer is just a form that the Department of Homeland Security sends to police officers or, in the sheriff's departments and says, this particular person, we want you to hold them up to 48 hours after they're eligible for release. This particular bill would not only force you to honor those detainers, but it would extend the 48-hour period to 96 hours. The federal courts have said that there's a very big problem with cities honoring those detainers because they violate the Fourth Amendment. Why? It's not that a detainer's not a warrant, and there's been no determination of probable cause. So, very big problem. And so cities have been sued in the past because of that. But this bill says, oh, don't worry about it, the federal government will foot the bill. So it doesn't take care of the constitutional issue, and now we, as taxpayers, are going to be responsible, right, for paying for violations of people's constitutional rights, basically. So that's, in essence, that's what happens. It violates the 10th Amendment because federal government can't force cities and states to do its job. Like I started saying, this is not their job. This is a federal government. You cannot ask the federal government to do that, just like you cannot force your neighbor to mow your lawn. I mean, you cannot do it. That's not your neighbor's responsibility, just as an analogy. All right, so all that is going on. I'm going to close really, really quickly by saying that at the same time, there's this amazing movement going on in this country. And it is so just an example of how, as Americans and with civil rights, we've moved forward. When these types of laws and there's this type of very extreme draconian sort of policies pushing against the people get together and start doing exactly what we're doing right here in Boston right now. There's 600 jurisdictions and probably growing. And I'm going to close by just giving you an example that I read about yesterday. In my home state of Texas, by the way, which has enacted its own executive orders, sort of like the president's, and probably even worse, there's a tiny little city called Sencio, which is in the border of Texas and Mexico. So this is the way it's described. It's a young mayor who's also a graduate student. 3,500 people are in this, 2 churches, 2 convenience stores, and 1 stop sign. He was the very first person that filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas. 3,500 people got together and said, no, this is not going to happen. In Texas, he can lose his job. There can be all sorts of penalties. But he said, I'm on the right side of history. And that's exactly what's happening here today. And I appreciate very much that I am here. I came from Washington, D.C. to be part of this really important discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nesana. That was really powerful. Thank you. So, Ivan, your organization has been at the forefront leading the response on the civil rights front. If this law that Iracema just described gets anywhere near being enacted, I guarantee that you will be among the first ones suing. But tell us what you've been doing, what your organization has been doing since January, since the Muslim ban was, since that executive order was enacted, and the many other ones. Give us an overview of the work that you guys have been doing.
So I really appreciate the analogy of forcing your neighbor to mow your lawn. I think it's a very effective analogy for talking about the type of separation of powers, the structure that the Constitution requires and that our American government is built on, right? We are all very familiar with the fact that, there's the states and there's the federal government, And they have separate responsibilities, separate duties, separate roles. The role of the federal government includes the arena of immigration enforcement. It includes the whole notion of how the immigration system goes. And one thing that is very clear is that that's something that's exclusively reserved for the federal government and not for the states, right? The states have separate duties and responsibilities under the scheme of federalism that we work in. And when the federal government turns around and says, we will require you to honor an immigration detainer, or we will require you to have certain policies in place related to immigration, like saying that a police officer has to check your immigration status, or that certain city services cannot be provided to immigrants based on their immigration status, that is constitutional overreach. It's incredibly damaging, not only because it's illegal, but because it goes against the principles that this country was built on, principles of inclusion, principles of having the local entities being able to pursue their own priorities and satisfy the needs of its constituencies. If a city like Chelsea or like Somerville decides that it has a deprioritized immigration, provide services without regard to immigration status, that is their right under the Constitution and under our system of government. And that's why at the Lawyers Committee, immediately after the Sanctuary Cities executive order was signed on January 25th, we started working very closely with the cities of Chelsea and the city of Lawrence to challenge the constitutionality of the executive order. And we went from the signing of the executive order to filing in court in about 10 days. I mean, it was incredible. You could get whiplash. It was amazing to see so many people coming together to say, we are going to protect all families and children in our communities. We're going to stand for our rights, and we're not going to let the federal government tell us what we have to do. The federal government doesn't know what's happening in the street in Chelsea. It doesn't know what's happening to families in Somerville or Lawrence. The people in these communities have the right to come up with policies that make sense to them. And at the Lawyers Committee, we are very proud to be the first and still the only organization in the country who sued the federal government on the Sanctuary Cities front. And we did that. Thanks, guys. And we did that because, we saw what happened with the travel ban, right? At the airports, where people were getting stopped, where people were illegally detained. It was complete chaos. And we refuse to live in a world where the federal government is going to wreak that type of havoc in immigrant communities. These immigrant communities have rights, just like the people in those airports, and we need to stand with them. And I think the most fundamental part, and I'll close with this, is that these small towns like Chelsea, towns like Lawrence, they have a dog in this fight. This is not just for the San Franciscos of the world. This is not just for the New Yorks of the world. These small towns are where many immigrants live. There are over 600 sanctuary communities in this country, and not all of them look like San Francisco or New York or Boston. And so to threaten a small community like Chelsea, like Lawrence, with federal defunding is incredibly destabilizing. It would mean closing schools. It would mean not serving lunch or breakfast to kids in schools. That's what it means. And so it's important for these communities to step forward and protect their rights. And we're really glad to see that, that the Sanctuary Cities executive order has been stopped by a federal judge and is now pending appellate review, but we're going to continue to push.
Okay, now, Chief Kais, can you, you've been working in the Chelsea community for, this is not new. The trust and the engagement that you have with the community there is not new. It didn't happen overnight. Can you tell us what are some of the strategies that you have been employing there to engage the immigrant community? Chelsea, we should remind everyone, is 60 or so percent Latino, correct?
Yeah, no, that's correct. So just going back a little bit, I became the chief in Chelsea in the summer of 2007. And many of us in the room certainly remember on March 6th of 2007, there was the raid by ICE, the ERO folks, and 360 people were placed in custody down in New Bedford. The city of Chelsea became a sanctuary city in June of 2007 as a result. So when I became chief at that time, this was definitely a hot button issue of the day. Jasenia Alfaro is here from the Chelsea Collaborative, and she can attest to the relationship that the Chelsea Police Department has with our community, with the Collaborative. I mean, the Chelsea Collaborative is one of our biggest voices. Certainly we in the department, myself and ranking superior officers and patrol officers, we go out into the community, we meet with groups, we talk, we want to establish that level of trust as high as it can possibly be. But honestly, people like Jasenia and Gladys Vega and others, when our residents and our constituents hear from them that they can trust the police, that carries so much weight. So, you know, I can sit in my office today or walk down Bellingham Square in the city and think that we in the police department are doing a great job in terms of the level of trust, but that's today. You know, tomorrow's another day. We have to keep at it each and every day. I certainly agree with the other panelists, everything that they mentioned. First of all, this particular issue, at least from my perspective, is very complicated. There's certainly a lot of moving parts. And, you know, we talk about Trust Act cities, sanctuary cities, welcoming cities. Even, you know, Chelsea being a sanctuary city for the last 10 years, it means different things in different communities. And one of the very basic premises of our Sanctuary City Act is that the Chelsea Police Department shall not participate in any immigration-related raids, period. And we don't. I mean, thankfully, since New Bedford, there haven't been any raids in the state, but there've been roundups. There've been what they call onesies and twosies. These are just some terms that are thrown out there. ICE will come into the city looking for an individual, one individual or two. But when I say it's complicated, and just to kind of throw it out there, that when you think of the federal government and you think of law enforcement agencies and you think of, you know, the FBI actually headquarters is located in Chelsea. And they have an organizational hierarchy where they have somebody that's in charge, a special agent in charge. And then they have some assistant special agent in charges, and then supervisory agents and agents. And you have this hierarchy. ICE is a little bit different. ICE has basically what they call two sides of the house. They have a criminal side and a civil side. So when the criminal side works with the Chelsea police, or the Lawrence police, or the Somerville police, they have someone that's wanted for a crime, a criminal violation of the law, just like it would be the FBI, the ATF, or the DEA. These types of relationships, law enforcement is involved in a lot. The civil side, which is based out of Burlington, Massachusetts, is known as the Enforcement and Removal Operations folks. That's different. And these are individuals that come into the city, in many cities in the Commonwealth, many diverse cities. There's a national protocol. They notify the department. They notify where they're actually going, what particular address, who the target is. But I don't know if Chelsea is unique. Perhaps we're somewhat unique in that if ICE was to come into the city today, and they were just in the city yesterday, and they're looking for an individual, and they tell us they're going to an address, the Chelsea Police Department is not part of that investigation. And, you know, some of my friends in law enforcement say, well, you know, what do you mean? You know, you're not going to go? And the answer is, we're not going to go. And, you know, we're not turning our backs on fellow law enforcement agents who may need help, there may be an officer safety situation. If there is, we get notified, certainly we'll come running. But I think that, you know, for me to sit here on this panel this morning in a uniform representing our department and just kind of envision that if we get a call this morning that someone has overstayed a visa, somebody has crossed the border, whatever the case may be, and ICE ERO is looking to take this person into custody, and I go along for the ride, so to speak. I stand on the sidewalk out front while ICE agents, and they do come in force. They come with, you know, 8 to 10 to 12 agents. And I stand there with my uniform, perhaps with the marked police unit, and ICE goes in and they take an individual, or, I mean, oftentimes even worse, there's a collateral arrest, someone who's not even the target of this this execution of this arrest, but someone who's a relative or a family friend. And all people remember is Brian Keyes was standing on the sidewalk. He's a Chelsea police officer, I think, because he had a uniform on that said Chelsea Police. He had a badge. The cruiser, I read the side of it. I saw it said Chelsea Police. And that sends the message, the erroneous message, that the Chelsea Police are enforcing civil immigration law. And I started out this conversation by using the word trust. The trust that we've established that I think is at an optimal level will just go right down to the bottom, just like that. I mean, word will spread like wildfire, especially with social media. So we are not a part of that operation at all. Jasenia knows this, that, Jasenia and the Chelsea Collaborative, they have many, many, many constituents. And when there's an operation that takes place locally, in terms of, I hope, a best practice, we have all the information on who was taken into custody. I'll put together a communication. Honestly, usually it's just as simple as a text message that I'm sending to my boss, to the city councilors, and to other advocacy leaders in the city. So social media doesn't take any traction, and it spreads like wildfire that ICE is in the city, there's a raid, there's a roundup, 20, 30, 40, 100 people are placed in custody. I give the information exactly how it is. So by the time they wake up, oftentimes, I mean, ICE is in the city very, very early in the morning, and they clear about 6:30 in the morning, that individuals wake up and they look at their text, and when they get calls, and Jasenia, you get calls, she has the correct information to set the record straight.
So Mayor Curtatone, a little bit of same question, but also different in the sense that if you can talk about what kind of efforts you've been, conducting in your city and what positive results that has yielded in terms of engaging with the immigrant community.
Well, thank you, and good morning. It's an honor to be part of a distinguished panel and among so many people doing important work. I want to touch on that, but I do want to, it's such it's a continuum of, and when I say it's an important time to exclaim what we believe in, what we're fighting for, because silence is acquiescence on this issue. When I hear, to be honest with you, some of my colleagues in government here who might be part of this organization too, who will say, well, do we really need to say anything? We're following the policies. Yeah, you do need to say something. Because every time Sessions or AG Sessions or the president says something, or this heinous piece of legislation called No Sanctuary for Criminals legislation is trying to pass through the House, what we find, I'm sure you find in your communities, our kids don't go to school, people don't go to work, families are not seeking preventive health services. So we need to stand up and be loud and be vocal every chance we can, and not just to react. And what we're trying to do in Somerville in terms of our engagement, to empower everyone in the communities, let them know, well, Somerville's their community. I'm their mayor. We serve them. The police is there to protect them. So we do a few different things, and I'll give you some examples, whether it's our liaison program to the schools or our Summer Viva program, a liaison program to the city, where we're actually, so we do translation and work with people to facilitate meetings where we're out in the community bringing information and engagement right to them in their churches, in the supermarket, on the streets. We had found a couple of years ago that only 98%, notwithstanding all the great efforts around communication and social media that we do, only 98%, almost 98% of the communication was not reaching the foreign-born population, which is over a third in the city of Somerville, and about 60 languages spoken in our neighborhoods and our schools. We meet continuously, law enforcement, city officials, with different immigrant provider groups. We've established a continuum of consulate services, utilizing City Hall. So again, empowering people with the belief that this is their city and they're commandeering and they're empowered to envision its future. So we're trying to earn that trust and that credibility with the people we serve. We've been a sanctuary city since 1987. We were at the forefront. Activists were at the forefront. Law enforcement was at the forefront from what we saw during the great wave of undocumented immigration as a consequence of the Civil War in Central America, which interestingly was exacerbated by our country's foreign policy. Law enforcement and the Catholic Church were saying, look, we need to embrace people. We need to give them a feeling of solace and safety in our communities. And we found that it's not the only reason, but crime since 1987 in Somerville is down 52.9%. That's not the only reason, but it's a big part of it. And we've done a lot of painstaking work to earn trust with people, to gain credibility. But again, every time the rhetoric, the negative rhetoric out of Washington, or what is happening across this country, and I want to talk about that in a second, is exclaimed, we see that by people backing into the shadows again, looking over their shoulders, thinking twice of whether to go to a community event or to their schools. And that is very frightening. We're proud of who we are. We're not going to run away. We're always going to be a sanctuary city, and we're not going to be buckled down by any threat or sort of Damocles hung over our head by money by the federal government. So, you know, our work is not just programs we put in place, but being out in the street, myself, leaders, law enforcement, activists, one-on-one with families, helping out every chance we get and reinforcing the message that this is one community and it's part of the One Somerville movement. Again, One Somerville, www.onesomerville.org. I invite you to look at that because that should be the one community movement around the country.
Chief Kais, I wanted to ask you something you said, and you also touched on it a little bit, Mayor Curtatone. There are many other chiefs of police or sheriff officials, other law enforcement agencies that don't feel the way that you do, other mayors that have a different take on this, a different approach. Do you try to advocate for this, and if so, with them? Do you try to convince them? Do you try to talk them into the benefits of having a policy that just prioritizes trust with residents? And if so, what is the best argument that you try to advance? How can we help, you know, in changing their minds, and what's the best argument?
Sure. So it's a great question. So going back, as I mentioned, in 2007, one of the first things I did as chief is we didn't have a policy on how to direct our officers, how to basically go out into the field, and when ICE comes into the city, how does this whole scenario work? So one of the first things I did was interesting, as I put a policy together, reduced it to writing in 2007. The policy was modified in May of 2012 when Secure Communities came online. It was modified again in January of 2015 when the Priority Enforcement Program came online. And then it was modified again January 25th of 2017 when the executive order came out enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States. What's been interesting is in the last 5 months, I modified the policy 7 times. And again, just all those years, it's just, you know, every couple of years it's modified. What I did with our policy, and I see Fred Ryan here today from Arlington, the vice president of the Major City Police Chiefs Association. Fred and I and others through the Major City Chiefs, we have this particular policy, and others, I know Salem had a nice policy. We sent our policy out to other police chiefs, then to the Mass Chiefs Police Association. So it's funny that I go around to different venues, and Fred and I do a lot of work together, and there's policies that a particular department, and I'll give one example. Fred and I were in Lowell the other day, and the Lowell Police Department presented a policy to us. It just came up on this issue. And I start reading it, and I'm reading word for word the policy that originated in Chelsea, which is a great thing. The same with Cambridge and other places. So we try to preach the message that this is the way to go. But you brought up one point that I think is interesting. There's a little bit of confusion, too, that in terms of law enforcement, there's police officers that work out in the street. There's police officers that engage the community out in the street. There's police officers that need the trust of the people out in the street. That's a little bit different than somebody who is a sheriff or a deputy sheriff who works inside the 4 walls of a building, whether it be a jail or a house of correction. So one of the issues that may or may not come up today is the issue of a 287G agreement. And this is where, you know, again, you asked the question, like, what do we say to other chiefs? This is one of the primary examples. When we use the word trust, and there's some people that are sheriffs, perhaps that are vocal, that are in the media, and they try to paint the wide brush of law enforcement. It's different. And we advocate to get the trust of the people in the street. You need people to trust you to come forward to report crimes. You need people to come forward to be witnesses to crimes, because if they do not trust the police, the perpetrators of these crimes, trust me, they know who to target, and they know who they think will not go to the police. And the cycle of victimization will just go round and round and round. So through leaders like Fred Ryan, myself, and others in the Major City Chiefs and the Mass Chiefs, we just try to preach the message that there's a difference between sheriffs and law enforcement, and trust is the way to accomplish our job and keep our community safe.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that, because the chief alluded to something that's important. You know, when people disagree with us, so this is important for everyone in this conversation, it would be wrong for us to just dismiss them as being racist or bigots. It'd be a very bad mistake. A lot of it is based so much on misinformation. Arming ourselves with facts and information is critical here. and at some point I'll end with the value conversation we have. We talk about values, why the importance of what we're doing and the role immigrants play in our economy, our quality of life, and the very foundation of our democracy in this country. But what we hear often from people is, well, I just want to keep my community safe. Oh, so don't we, so don't immigrants. And crime is down in our communities. Or, we just want people to follow a process. They should follow a process like everyone, like my mother or my uncle. By the way, my uncle, I don't think followed the process. He jumped off a vessel somewhere, I'll guarantee you that. But follow a process like everyone stand in a line to become fully documented. Well, there is no line to stand in. And then when we have that conversation and we butt rest that with the fact that immigrants love this country as much as you and I, whether you're born here or not. And that's the change the conversation. But when we arm ourselves with facts and information, it starts to neutralize. But it starts also with listening. Even when someone's saying the most ridiculous thing, the most misinformed argument, listening and then arming ourselves with information. It starts to turn that argument with law enforcement, as my Chief Dave Fallon does with his colleagues here today, as I do with my fellow mayors and municipal leaders, about the importance of why to be very vocal about this. And that's something we should take away from what we do here today.
Iracema, did you want to add something to that?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yes. So one of the things that the administration, the strategy has been to sort of support these very draconian policies is to link crime to immigrants and immigration. And there's, completely false, as you said. There's a study out by a professor at the University of California in San Diego that did a study about counties that are sanctuary jurisdictions. And what he found was crime was lower, wages were higher, cities grew more, they were a more productive, city. So every single thing that is out there that's, perpetuated about, immigrants and sanctuary cities was basically proved, wrong by this particular study. And the other thing I wanted to say is that in this bill that's pending today, what the federal government is saying is if sanctuary cities don't honor every single thing we ask you to do, presumably including 287Gs, right? Because, that would be one of the things that they may want to put forward. Then what we're going to do is, one, we're going to take away funding, some of it for law enforcement, some of it for national security and community policing. These are really important grants, right, that the federal government does so that people can, not immigrants, but everybody, so there's a relationship with that. But the other thing is going to say, and if you continue to do what you're doing, guess what? If you have a warrant out for a particular person, right, that should be detained, it's undocumented, but it's a serious crime, we're not going to honor your warrant. So this is just, whether it passes or not, I think the important thing is that it gives us an insight about sort of what's going on in our country in, relationship to immigrants and how false some of these premises are.
Before I give you an opportunity to comment, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew what a 287G is. And it is basically an agreement between the federal government and a jurisdiction, be it a sheriff's office, a police department, or any other state law enforcement agency, in which the federal government deputizes the local law enforcement agencies as immigration enforcement or immigration agents, and it costs money. In Massachusetts, I believe only 2 or 3, it's 2 sheriff's offices. I think it's just Sheriff Hudson, of course, and then what is another, I think it's Plymouth. Yeah. But no other, no police department has, I mean, I guess we are lucky in that sense. There are other jurisdictions that, or the states that have many more, but that's a little bit scary if that's what's coming up. So, Ivan, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, no, that's a great point about the 287G. You know, Framingham had one of those where they got their folks deputized, and they realized that it destroyed the trust that the chief was talking about, right? If you're, and it's really about humanizing this issue in some ways, and I think about it personally, right? If I'm walking down the street and I get attacked, right, and the only witness to that crime is an undocumented immigrant, and the immigrant saw the chief at the raid or in some immigration detention activity, do you think that that immigrant is going to pick up the phone and dial 911 and say, they just beat up some guy here in the street, he's in the corner, or I just saw this car accident happen, it was a hit and run, and this is the plate number, right? Like just that interaction places somebody at risk. It brings them within the specter of immigration enforcement. It makes no sense to me why a community would not want everybody in that town to be comfortable dialing 911. What if something happened to you, to your kid, right? And the only witness was an undocumented immigrant. And I think that people just don't think about the ramifications, like how this can harm them, their own families, and other U.S. citizens. You know, even if you don't care about the well-being of undocumented immigrants, I would hope that at least you care about your own well-being and giving people the power to call 911. So I think that's really important, and so I wanted to underscore that point that the chief was making. And the other thing is that the type of 287G deputizing that we're talking about here, or any type of enforcement activity, if a city decides to collaborate with immigration, there is no reimbursement for that money. That is your tax dollars, your local tax dollars being used for federal immigration functions. So let's be very clear here that the town does not receive a cent for this enforcement. So if you think your taxes are already high, if you think you're paying too much in property taxes, that your kid doesn't even have the facilities that they need at school, well then just add immigration enforcement to your tax bill, because that's exactly what's happening. And so it seems to me that it's not just this public safety issue, it's also a fiscal issue. It's an issue of just being fiscally sound and responsible as local jurisdictions, towns, and counties. You know, we don't need to subsidize the federal government for its work. Let federal tax dollars take care of that. And the third thing is, and I will give a little bit of pushback here to what the mayor, very respectfully, Mayor, what you said. I'm sorry, but I do think that there is a racist aspect to this.
Well, let me say it now, and you've heard me say it. There's no pushback on me because I agree with that. I've said all in all before, you need to put immigration in context, and I have to jump in here. This conversation, in the context of this, when you're talking about building a wall and spending billions of dollars, which will have no impact. When you have a Muslim ban, which every expert says that will make us less safe. And when you fail to recognize the facts like the role that immigrants play, undocumented immigrants play in holding up our national economy and social security system, and you ask, well, when policy, and I agree, is pushed forth not based on logic and reasoning, what's driving it, and I will say it, is an ugly undercurrent, and it is based on race and white nationalism.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. And it has to be said, my only point is, it's not always the person on the other side isn't a racist or white nationalist. I've had family members who are sons or immigrants themselves, and I've turned people in a conversation based on facts saying, well, and my mother said to people, why should people have it as difficult as we had it? Or the fact that, don't you realize that immigrants play this important role in our economy when they say people are taken away from us? Or the fact that Somerville is safer.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
My only point is to have empathy, and this is about leadership. Leadership is about all of us having empathy and to hear the most ugliest thing and arm ourselves with information and facts, but make no mistake, there is, out of Washington, there is this undercurrent that is based on race and white nationalism. I fully agree.
And I think we need to voice that, because if we don't voice that, I think that we're doing a disservice. You know, in Massachusetts, progressive Massachusetts, we are the 4th state in the country, the highest 4th in hate crimes right now. Only 3 other states have registered more hate crimes than Massachusetts since the election. It is shocking to me that in progressive Massachusetts, we are basically leading the pack on everything from hate crimes to intimidation to attacks on mosques, attacks on immigrant families, And we can't just let the status quo and business as usual go. We need to make sure that we're standing up and that we're saying no to hate and no to racial profiling, disparate enforcement of policies, right? If we arm sheriffs, local police with immigration enforcement, it gives them one more tool to potentially use against communities of color and immigrant communities. And I think it's very important not to ignore the liability that comes to a city, to a sheriff's office, when they are engaging in racial profiling and other things like that. And so we need to be very careful about what we open the door to. You sign on to a 287G agreement, like Sheriff Hodgson in Bristol County, and that opens the door to tremendous liability for everything from targeting Latinos for enforcement activities, treating Latinos differently, using those tools against communities of color and immigrant communities. So I want to make sure that we don't ignore the fact that, and I agree, Mayor, that there are many people who might not have the facts, but I also want to make sure that we are keeping in mind that there are bad actors out there, people who say that they want to send their inmates to build a wall, and that those people can use these tools for evil. And we need to be very clear about that. And that's why organizations like the Lawyers Committee are pushing back, and we sued Sheriff Hodgson because we refuse to live in a world where racial profiling and discrimination runs rampant.